Excerpt from The Joy of Living, Unlocking the Secret and Sense of Happiness by Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche. Part 1. The Ground. All sentient beings, including ourselves, already possess the primary cause for enlightenment, Kampopa, the jewel ornament of liberation. 1. The journey begins. If there is any religion that would cope with modern scientific needs, it would be Buddhism. Albert Einstein. When you are trained as a Buddhist, you don't think Buddhism as a religion. You think of it as a type of science, a method of exploring your own experience through techniques that enable you to examine your actions and reactions in a non-judgmental way, with the view toward recognizing, oh, this is how my mind works. This is what I need to do to experience happiness. This is what I should avoid to avoid unhappiness. At its heart, Buddhism is very practical. It's about doing things that foster serenity, happiness, and confidence, and avoiding things that provoke anxiety, hopelessness, and fear. The essence of Buddhist practice is not so much an effort at changing your thoughts or your behavior so that you can become a better person, but in realizing that no matter what you might think about the circumstances that define your life, you're already good, whole, and complete. It's about recognizing the inherent potential of your mind. In other words, Buddhism is not so much concerned with getting well as with recognizing that you are right here, right now, as whole, as good, as essentially well as you could ever hope to be. A meeting of minds. We have to go through the process of sitting down and examining the mind and examine our experience to see what is really going on. Kalu Rinpoche, the gem ornament of manifest instructions. Classic Buddhist texts begin by presenting a theoretical or philosophical basis of examination, commonly referred to as the ground. They then move on to various methods of practice, commonly referred to as the path, and finally conclude with an analysis of the results of personal experiments and suggestions for further study, typically described as the fruit. Western scientific investigation often follows a similar structure, beginning with a theory or hypothesis, an explanation of the methods through which the theory is tested, and an analysis comparing the results of the experiment against the original hypothesis. What fascinated me most about simultaneously learning about modern science and Buddhist practice was that while the Buddhist approach was able to teach people an introspective or subjective method for realizing their full capacity for happiness, the Western perspective explained in a more objective fashion why and how the teaching worked. By themselves, Buddhism and modern science both provided extraordinary insights into the workings of the human mind. Taken together, they formed a more complete and intelligible whole. The importance of lineage. Conceptual knowledge is not enough. You must have the conviction that comes from personal experience. The ninth Gawa Kamapa, Mahamudra, the ocean of definitive meaning. The method of exploring and working directly with the mind that we call Buddhism has its source in the teachings of a young Indian nobleman named Siddhartha. Upon witnessing firsthand the terrible misery experienced by people who had not grown up in the same privileged environment he enjoyed, Siddhartha gave up the security and comforts of his home to find a solution to the problem of human suffering. Suffering takes many forms, ranging from the nagging whisper that we could be happier if only some small aspect of our lives were different, to the pain of illness and the terror of death. Siddhartha became an ascetic, wandering across India to study under teachers who professed to have found the solution he was seeking. Unfortunately, none of the answers they provided and none of the practices they taught him seemed entirely complete. At last, he decided to abandon outside advice altogether and seek the solution to the problem of suffering in the place he had begun to suspect it originated within his own mind, in a place called Bodh Gaya, in the northeastern Indian province of Bihar. He sat under the shelter of a tree and sunk deeper and deeper into his own mind, determined to find the answers he sought, or die in the attempt. After many days and nights, he finally discovered what he was looking for, a fundamental awareness that was unchanging, indestructible, and infinite in scope. When he emerged from his state of profound meditation, he was no longer Siddhartha, he was the Buddha, a Sanskrit title that means the one who is awake. What he had awakened to was the full potential of his own nature, which had previously been limited by what is commonly referred to as dualism, the idea of a distinct and inherently real self that is separate from an apparently distinct and inherently real other. As we'll explore later, dualism is not a character flaw or defect. There's a complex survival mechanism deeply rooted in the structure and function of the brain, along with other mechanisms can be changed through experience. The Buddha recognized this capacity for change through introspective examination. The ways in which mistaken concepts become embedded in the mind and the means for cutting through them were the subjects of the teaching he gave over the next 40 years of his life as he traveled throughout India, attracting hundreds, perhaps thousands of students. More than 2,500 years later, modern scientists are beginning to demonstrate through rigorous clinical research that the insights he'd gained through the subjective examination are amazingly accurate. Meeting my mind. Just realizing the meaning of mind encompasses all understanding. Jiangong Kangchu, outline of essential points. For 3 days, I stayed in my room meditating, using many of the teachings described later in this book. Gradually, I began to recognize how feeble and transitory the thoughts and emotions that had troubled me for years actually were, and how fixing on small problems had turned them into big ones just by sitting quietly and observing how rapidly and in many ways illogically my thoughts and emotions came and went. I began to recognize in a direct way that they wasn't nearly as solid or real as they appeared to be, and once I began to let go of my belief in the story they seemed to tell, I began to see the author beyond them and the infinitely vast, infinitely open awareness that is the nature of mind itself. Any attempt to capture the direct experience of the nature of mind in words is impossible. The best that can be said is that the experience is immeasurably peaceful, and once stabilized through repeated experience, virtually unshakable. It's an experience of absolute well-being that radiates through all physical, emotional, and mental states, even those that might be ordinarily labeled as unpleasant. This sense of well-being, regardless of the fluctuations of outer and inner experiences, is one of the clearest ways to understand what Buddhists mean by happiness, and I was fortunate to have caught a glimpse of it during my 3 days of isolation. Light from the west. One single torch can dissipate the accumulated darkness of 1,000 eons. Tilupa, Mahamudra of the Ganges. I learned a lot about the biological mechanisms of the mind during the Dhammasala conference, but it was the MIT conference which focused on the correlations between the introspective Buddhist methods of exploring experience and the objective approach of modern science that got me thinking about how to bring what I've learned during my years of training to people who wasn't necessarily familiar with the Buddhist practice or the intricacies of modern science. As the conference ended, participants from both the Buddhist and the Western scientific panels recognized not only that both sides stood to gain enormously through finding ways to work together, but also that the collaboration itself represented a major opportunity to improve the quality of human life. In his closing remarks, Eric S. Lander, PhD, a professor of molecular biology at MIT and the director of the Whitehead Institute, MIT Center for Genome Research, pointed out while Buddhist practices emphasize attaining increased level of mental awareness, the focus of modern science has rested on refining ways to restore mentally ill patients to a state of normalcy. Why stop there? He asked the audience. Why are we satisfied with the saying we're not mentally ill? Why not focus on getting better and better? Professor Lander's questions set me thinking about creating some ways to offer people an opportunity to apply the lessons of Buddhism and modern science to the problems they face in their everyday lives. As I learned the hard ways during my first years in retreat, theoretical understanding alone is simply not enough to overcome the psychological and biological habits that create so much heartache and pain in daily life. For real transformation to occur, theory has to be applied through practice. How lucky we are to be alive at this unique moment in human history, when the collaboration between Western and Buddhist scientists is poised to offer all humanity the possibility of achieving a level of well-being that defies imagination. My hope in writing this book is that everyone who reads it will recognize the practical benefits of applying the lessons of this extraordinary collaboration, and that they will realize for themselves the promise of their full human potential.